Chapter 6. Silva knew she'd find Bram and Kieran near the edge of the staging lane, close enough to be called if needed, but far enough to be ignored otherwise. Silva slowed before stepping into the camp, wanting a little space around her first. The fog had lifted just enough to expose a thin, bruised strip of sky. Everyone looked up when the light passed over the camp, then bent back to their work when the clouds swallowed it again, as if the light itself had realized it did not belong there. Things had been so clear to her when she was in the Aegis. Her objectives were concrete. The obstacles she had to overcome had faces, names, or pages that needed only be read and studied for her to prevail. She had turned her eyes away from that life. The opportunity she had now was out of desperation. They didn't seek her for her genius, or apologize for the injustice of her discharge. Barton would drink even dirty water before dying of thirst. Her ego burned at the notion that she was being allowed to work on the quarantine barrier wards because they had no other choice. The bumbling runesmith she had seen working should have been scraping his forehead on the ground for the chance to apprentice under her, but no, that wasn't her anymore. Silva had shed the right to that pride with her blue uniform when she was told to remove the insignia of the 103. "Silva!" a gruff voice called, snapping her out of her thoughts. She blinked and realized she was standing in front of her team, her friends. Bram sat on an upturned crate with his elbows on his knees, posture disciplined even in exhaustion. Kieran paced nearby, restless, checking buckles on his gear. Exhausted as they were, rest would not come until the smell of charred flesh stopped haunting them. It was ironic that the respirators could block the plague, but not the scent red-hot iron made when it closed a sore. Bram's eyes stayed on her. "Where have you been?" he asked. Silva winced. She had made him worry. "Walking the ward line, looking for mistakes," she said. "Hanging on to a life that has passed us both," he said, sighing. "Perhaps not," Silva replied. Bram cocked an eyebrow at her as Kieran sat down, curiosity overtaking his nerves. "I found a mistake, and the Major noticed. He held me for a word," she said. "That's why I was late getting back. Sorry if I worried you." Bram ignored the apology, his face becoming serious. What did he want? Silva knew how he felt. Neither of them had good reason to trust the Aegis anymore. "He wants ward support," she said. "Me. Specifically." Kieran's face lit with immediate interest. "For what?" "The quarantine barriers are going up too slow," Silva said, her tone dry. "He's short on competent runesmiths." Bram's jaw tightened. "And he thinks borrowing a greycoat fixes that. He thinks borrowing a trained hand does." Silva let the idea settle, then added, "He is desperate. He even offered a trade." Kieran leaned forward. "A trade for what?" Silva met Bram's eyes first, gauging his reaction. "3 Aegis regulars," she said, "assigned to replace us on burn detail and line support. They take our rotations so we aren't abandoning the sick to prop up their ward crews." Kieran let out a breath of relief through his teeth. "So, we're done burning sores? For now, if we all agree," Silva said. "If people start to suffer, we will find time to help. But our primary duty shifts." Bram bristled. "What's the catch?" Silva smiled wanly at Bram. "The writ is revocable," she said. "It authorizes us, as independent ward maintenance consultants across the quarantine districts. Integrity checks, repairs. But," she paused for effect, "we get access to placement maps, quarantine plans, and incident stats." "That's," Kieran began, before Bram cut back in. "It's Aegis work," Bram said, his hesitation clear. "It will come with scrutiny." "A reasonable point," she said. "If something fails, they'll investigate. If they need a scapegoat, we know who will get to answer." Silva could see Bram chew on the idea, wanting to swallow. He longed to return to that familiarity of the machine, like she longed for her runes. It was impossible to purge the part of him that remembered the simplicity of defined roles and clear command chains. How it felt to know that he belonged. Kieran, on the other hand, looked like she'd just offered him clemency. "So? We don't..." He made a crude gesture of emptying a chamber pot, then gagging. We don't have to do that anymore? We are reclaimers, and we do that work when it's needed, Silva said, refusing to let her own relief at the prospect show. But this gives us leverage. Information, access, a chance to do more than watch the spread with bound hands. Bram held her gaze, weighing the words the way he weighed risk. This isn't one of your puzzles, Silva. They gave you chalk to draw runes for Kieran and me to carve, not command of quarantine protocol. It's already jumped the wards once, she said, her annoyance at Bram's ability to read her bleeding through. It will again. If I can keep the rot from marring more children, would you have me stay silent? Bram frowned. No, I suppose not. Are we getting paid at least? Silva smiled, satisfied that the man had relented, though he had hardly fought. Contractor rate, she said. Comparable rank. All three of us. Kieran's mouth fell open. Paid like Aegis? Am the first worth less? Silva asked, daring him to argue. Bram barked a short laugh. Money was not his first language, but he knew the money would go toward keeping their camp fed and stocked. It meant not begging fruitlessly for supplies from people who'd rather see the greycoats vanish. And replacements, Bram mused. Yes, Silva confirmed. A runesmith is more valuable than a regular soldier, and he needs my eyes. The resistance in his shoulders crumbled, and he nodded. Kieran grinned outright. So, when do we start? Whenever they tell us, she said. Let's just hope I'm wrong, and the plague stays contained. If it doesn't, the Aegis will burn half the city to stop it, and we'll be standing in the fire with everyone else. Silva looked past them again, up toward the spire's impossible outline, and the city of Greyhaven on its first level. She'd be runesmithing for the Aegis, just like old times. 3 days into their ward work, Greyrot proved her right. Silva stood with the other runesmiths, their faces grim as they waited for the briefing to begin. She could smell her own sweat and body sealed inside the plague gear. It was something she would need to get used to. They would be wearing it constantly until the new perimeter was secured. The walls of the tent billowed in the breeze. Silva could sense it retreat as the canvas inhaled and closed around her, when the air escaped, as the runesmith's command center tried to catch its breath in the frantic rush to rebuild a wider perimeter. Kieran and Bram had stayed back, working with the rest of the quarantine barrier support detail to lift the stone pillars with the huge steam-powered loaders that would haul them to their new locations. Silva only had a moment to glance at the new boundaries that came down from the Marshal himself, who decided how much of the city would be swallowed and become part of the calculation for survival rates. She shook at the numbers her mind calculated involuntarily, 1.5 times larger in radius than the last expansion. The first quarantine took 10,000 in the densely populated slums around Wharf 9. The new boundary reached into the warehouse district, the docks fed. 30,000 more would be locked in with a monster that took half if untreated, and a quarter if the reclaimers could stomach burning thousands of children until new sores stopped appearing. If only 10,000 more died, it would be a miracle. Major Barton walked in, the redness of his face almost enough to hide the signs of exhaustion. He settled behind the makeshift desk on the other side, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the table and tent his fingers over his mouth. You should all be aware that the Marshal is scrutinizing the entire quarantine operation. He advised that he would be looking for breaches in 4 general categories. First, a procedural oversight could have allowed contaminated supply crates to exit instead of being incinerated. Next, a soldier could have been infected through plague gear malfunction and spread it unknowingly. A quarantined citizen could have bribed a guard for release. And finally, a quarantine barrier failure. That's us, Major Barton said, his anger at the implication clear. Were we not forced to dismantle all our barriers to expand the districts, we could disprove any implication that the breach was due to your work. It wasn't you. Your work has been tireless, and there were no signs that any sections of the ward barrier failed. All of the shards are intact, and the essence that remains in them is consistent with a constant and stable pull that supports a functional barrier. Know that I have faith in all of you, even if you hear talk of electors filing grievances. If someone from the marshal's office wants to interview you, do not lash out. Comply, and tell the truth. We have nothing to hide. He looked meaningfully at Silva as he said it. She couldn't deny the marshal a thorough look at the failure from every angle possible, because that's what it was. It didn't matter why it happened, or how. All of their efforts had resulted in failure. She agreed with Barton that it hadn't been the wards. She walked them every evening. They had been crude, but they were done well. She forced down a chuckle at the thought of one of the slum's residents gathering enough coin to bribe a guard into letting them out. Wharf 9 housed the poor. The wealthier criminals whose business took them there had retreated to residences long ago, knowing that the plague that started in the villages outside of Harbor's Edge would find its way to Wharf 9 first. Money wasn't a shield against sickness, but sickness passed slower when a dozen lived in a mansion instead of sleeping on top of each other in a room that would be too small to serve as a pantry further up the hill in the city. A soldier getting sick, or a procedural mistake, struck her as the more likely breach. As such, the marshal has invited the electors or prefects of the city to supervise the barrier installation from outside of the quarantine district, as they deem it necessary. I think he is calling their bluff, but if one of the slimy bastards has enough metal in their gears to get close enough to the quarantine zone to watch, just let them, and be polite. The linear distance we must cover for the new zone is 3 times what the last barrier required. I have requisitioned additional support to help, but expect longer hours. The runesmith's jaws all tightened. They already worked 12 hours a day. Less rest made for shaky hands. Barton stood and saluted the group. You're dismissed. Good luck, soldiers. Silva returned the salute with the rest of them before making to follow them out of the tent. Kren. A moment, Barton said, stopping her. She stopped, but he waited for the other runesmiths to pass through the weighted canvas flaps serving as a door, before he continued. You should know that the marshal has ordered that the supplemental rations the reclaimers were providing have been suspended until he can rule out a failure on their part. It will return to standard Aegis quarantine rations until evidence is collected and analyzed. Silva blanched. But they need those rations. Survival rates will deteriorate without the nutrition they get from sea cabbage. The truly ill can't hold down salt beef and hardtack. They need fish cakes for broth so the children can keep the food down. The nettle tea reduces fevers. It's not medicine, but it at least gives their bodies a chance to fight the infection, she said, her voice rising higher than she intended. I don't disagree, Barton said with a sigh. I am not justifying it. I am just informing you because I know the color of your coat. I will allow you some time to build a case for reinstating the rations, but I need you to continue with the pace you have set. Your output has been twice that of any other crew since you started. I am giving you authorization because I can't afford to have you arrested for dereliction if you leave to investigate without my permission. Can you operate within the latitude I am offering? Silva wasn't sure if she respected the man for foreseeing how this would create a conflict, or if she should bristle because he predicted how she would react. She nodded at him, deciding it was both. He waved her off, having secured her assent. Her step quickened once she was outside the tent. Without those rations, she predicted another 5,000 to 7,000 would die, most of them children. She couldn't accept that. They needed those rations, and she could buy them back with good records. That would save lives, but only some of the ones inside the barrier. Greyrot was finding a way out, and the Aegis couldn't find the hole. Bram might scold her at first, but even he would admit that if anyone could find the splinter in the sawdust, it would be Silva.